Hello, 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 and
Hello.
welcome to Intercultural Spark. Well, hello, 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 and welcome to Intercultural Spark, where each week we talk to business owners who are sparking change in the world through purpose centered businesses and life projects. As always, we like to start the show with our flash exercise. Dun, dun, dun. So the flash exercise is a exercise that actually relates to the theme of the show. So, our guest this week is Bill Cleveland. He is the founder of the Center for the Study of Art and Community. He is an amazing person who is literally sparking change with the arts around the globe. And also through his new podcast, Change the Story, Change the World. So I'm going to show you the exercise and we'll decide why I chose this for Bill. And then we'll oh my gosh, bring Bill on with us. So, and again, I'm your host, Deanna Schaas, founder of Intercultural Talk, as I turn into aerobics instructor mode. Okay, so our exercise is I always say these are exercises you can do at or near your desk. And this one it's a push-up with a side plank. So you can just do this literally on your desk, hands on your desk. You do a push-up, and then you open to the front with that side plank. So it's a push up, and then you can go to the back. So push up and plank. You want to make sure. So again, that was a push up with both hands on the desk, and then opening one arm to the front and then to the back, keeping your core, bracing your core so that it is really strong. So Bill Cleveland, I'll let you guess at the end, but that's your exercise for you today. How are
Okay.
you?
I'm doing good. Very good.
Good,
Yeah,
good. Wait, now I'm getting back into professional interviewer mode.
absolutely. I hear you.
So, can you tell us? So I know Bill because he spoke at a conference actually that was about about how the arts can be catalysts for change. Actually, it was for peacebuilding through the arts,
hmm
where you spoke at that conference, and of course have read your book since then, Art and Upheaval. Can
Right.
you can you just give an overview of what the Center for the Study of Art and Community does? I know it's hard to do in a sentence, but you're actually doing really profound work with the arts in like really difficult situations. But what does your organization do?
Our organization basically is we provide advice and consulting to communities and organizations, which include government agencies, philanthropy, uh, nonprofit arts organizations, and human service organizations, educational organizations. And we answer a pretty basic question. How can the arts help build caring and capable communities? And we do that in a number of areas. We help people design programs that are what we call hybrid cross-sector programs, meaning using the arts and arts-based tools and strategies to literally help organizations and communities address critical problems that they're facing.
And I just want to just insert in here because when you talk about community in this context,
hmm
the community could be a business community like
Absolutely.
Amazon. So it's whatever community people want to see some sort of change in.
Basic group of people who are self-organized and have an idea about where they are and where they want to go, and how do you use arts in order to do that. We also do training. We do training for artists and their cross-sector partners in what we call arts-based community development strategies and tools. We do a lot of research. So all of our training and all of the advice that we give out there in the world is based on 3 decades of documentation of exemplary and non-exemplary work out there in the field that once again we call arts-based community development.
Mhm. And I liked having you because this show always talks to business owners in terms of because what I find is is there are people doing amazing things in the world, living these fascinating lives, running businesses, that this is a business. This is what you do for a living. And I like to point that out because so many times when people think of the arts, they think, well, there's no money there. There's nothing you can do there. And, I think you and I were talking about so an education based programs that you did, and the
Mhm.
measurement is the same, whether it's arts based or
Mhm.
STEM based
Mhm.
or whatever it is. What was that program?
Well, uh, actually, I've done an awful lot of work with schools and school districts with the integration of arts into curriculum. It's a very common thing across the country where this happens. In fact, um, over the last 30 years, uh, what used to be a pretty normal part of schools has been basically relegated to the nonprofit community. There are far fewer arts teachers out there.
Right.
And so, how do you bring artists who are not teachers into classrooms? Now, the teaching artist movement, which is very long and has a deep history, um, there now has a very clear understanding of how it is that artists and teachers can work together in order to make um, creative learning strategies happen in schools, not just for learning how to paint or learning how to draw or learning how to make pots or theater or music, but how do you animate history? How do you animate geography? How do you animate chemistry? How do you animate all of these things as collaborative work by artists and teachers? This same question accrues to just about any other field. I'll give you an example.
Please.
City planning. How do artists and city planners work together in a way to advance the work of a planning department in a municipal in any municipality in the country? It may seem perplexing to many, but actually, if you think about what a planner does, one of their main jobs is to interact with members of the community to find out their hopes, their dreams, their needs, their complaints, their desires about what the future of their city, town, community, neighborhood should be. One of the most difficult parts of that process is planners actually getting a, a broad spectrum of people to reflect on those kinds of questions. And what happens when you bring an artist into it is that artists then become a partner in how to engage people in asking those questions. And an example would be in the city of Minneapolis, there was a whole group of embedded artists working with the planning department for multiple years, uh, doing neighborhood planning processes where they got a vastly different representation of the community using these tools and strategies than they normally would when they hold those meetings, at the school cafeteria between 5 and 7, and
Sure.
15 of the, usual suspects show up. They got young people. They got a very high representation of people of color. They got transit riders. And basically their strategy was artists don't invite people to come someplace. Artists go to where people are, and they use arts-based tools and strategies to ask the questions. It's a
Well, in some ways,
very
I guess they ask people to create with them too, that whole process of
absolutely.
creation.
Yep, absolutely. As a
Mhm.
way of answering those questions. Yes,
Mhm. Because you're so visual, we're going to go ahead and jump to, we've got the flash photo stories. So the
absolutely.
flash photo stories, I invited you to share some photos ahead of time that I flash the photo on the screen. You'll just describe it and tell what's happening in that image, because I feel like, especially, I mean, your podcast has changed the story, changed the world. That you're very embedded in stories, and each of the programs that you've worked in impacts individual lives so much. What's happening in this image?
This is a very well-known Australian actor, Trevor Jameson, in a production called Napaji Napaji, which was produced by an organization in Australia called Big Art, Bighart, capital ART, who uses arts-based tools and strategies to address critical issues facing the community in Australia. In this case, this story, this play, this production is about what happened to Trevor's family, the Pitjantjatjara people, in the Great Victorian Desert when the British used that desert to test nuclear weapons and literally forced the
Wow.
people out and left them, actually many of them, in that area, and the effect on their lives long term of nuclear tests. So, and this won the equivalent of a drama award in Australia, and the movie won the Academy Award of Australia
Mm,
about this same thing. So that's what that's about. And
mhm,
this is a chapter in my book, Art and Upheaval, and which recounts that story.
mhm. And did a lot of people, do you find that people knew what had happened? Was it something that was kept a secret, and by producing the play, like through the arts, it was able to bring to light? Or what's your sense on that?
Hidden in plain sight, and it's an often repeated story of a majority culture, in this case, white Australians, having no understanding of the extraordinary history that is right there under their feet, and it actually became headline news all over Australia when this old story was once again presented in both the language and the voices of the people who lived it.
Mhm. So it was like first person representation of the story. What year,
Absolutely.
just for context, what year was that England was doing the testing? Was that like in the 40s or?
This is in the 1950s and early 60s. And
Mm,
actually, Great Britain didn't want to test their weapons. And of course, in the British Isles, they went somewhere else into the Commonwealth, into that
mhm,
desert. So they piggybacked on another community.
mm.
This is a group of people in St. Louis, Missouri, who are a part of a program that I was a part of designing and a part of a faculty called the Community Arts Training Institute. And this is a 5-month-long rigorous training program, very intensive, very arts infused, basically training artists and their cross-sector community partners in the work of arts-based community development. This program in St. Louis is in its 23rd year,
Wow.
uh, and over 600 artists, human service folks, educators, community organizers have been through this program. It's an extraordinary experience for me, and the network of influence and leadership that exists in St. Louis, um, understanding and using arts-based skills and strategies for community development is in every sector across every walk of life in St. Louis.
Mm. It's interesting because I grew up in St. Louis, and I'm always impressed when I go back in terms of just even buildings that have been repurposed for art galleries. I think there's even a prison that became a community events location. So you can feel it in a lot of the arts based programming that's there. These people who are trained, do they then work for other organizations? Do they infuse these ideas into the work that they do wherever it is that they work?
Every walk of life. I mean, I'll give you an example.
Sure.
The executive director of Girls Inc.
Mm,
was one of the fellows in this program, who came curious and left with a commitment to integrating Girls Inc. with the arts from top to bottom. And so, if you can imagine 600 people like that in the community,
mm.
who are basically applying these skills and strategies and creating a network weaving across St. Louis. So there's so much collaboration between the people who are doing this kind of work.
that right there, when you get collaboration and partnership, I mean, that right there actually automatically engenders dialogue. And I think that's like where 1+1 = 1,000, where you
Mhm.
start having organizations working together and looking at things from
Mhm.
different angles. And
Yep.
that sounds like it's really at the crux of what you're doing in terms of integrating different ideas in how to approach whether it's community issues or even business, schools, everywhere.
Absolutely. This is Pillsbury House and Theater in Minneapolis, Minnesota. This is a production of a program that they've been doing for, I think maybe 15 years, called Breaking Ice. What they do is they come into a community or an organization, and often a corporation, and they create from scratch a a theatrical production which basically deals with racial equity issues in those places. And the script and the dialogue and the interaction all comes from their interviews and research in the organization. So they're all basically playing through scenes and circumstances and stories that have risen up from, let's just say, I'll give you an example. There was one in a major Midwest hospital that had 5,000 employees, and every single one of those employees attended a performance of this play where their story and their colleagues' stories about the often difficult and fraught um, experiences they've had dealing with racial equity issues. And it's basically a way that DEI leaders in companies and in communities can actually bring real life experience, real life theatrical experiences to bear on very difficult issues.
Mm. That's fascinating. So the theater production itself ends up being stories that are drawn from the group that you're working with.
Absolutely,
Wow.
absolutely, and
Which is
everybody's recognizing those
mm,
circumstances, they're shaking their head, they understand, they it's not somebody imposing something on them, they're basically giving them a mirror to reflect on in a very respectful and
mm,
safe way, rather than, a kind of um, a mandate, or, preaching, or, trying to make people feel guilty. This is quite the opposite. It's a very effective program, and they actually, Pillsbury House and Theater in the Twin Cities, has been there since 1990. The actual program that they have is a settlement house that started 140 years ago, and their program since, for the last 13 years, has been human services and the arts entirely integrated as uh, a community creative healing center for 30,000 people in the
mm,
Powderhorn and central neighborhoods of Minneapolis. So this is a revolutionary program, and I was privileged to have been a part of the design
mm,
and the evaluation of
mm.
this program.
And so again, just I always like to tie back to that business perspective of it. So you were brought in as a consultant to help them design and evaluate this program and make it happen.
Exactly, and facilitate community
Fascinating.
meetings,
Mhm,
and really serve as a sounding board, and actually bring many, many, many models that we have documented to the table for them to look at and learn from and steal from, which is, in the artist
mhm,
tradition, the
mhm.
one of the most effective ways of making change.
Sure. And just your website, because I know a lot of this, the information, the studies and things that you've done are there as well, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
This is one of the final scenes, for anybody who's in theater probably recognize it from Waiting for Godot. This particular production of Waiting for Godot took place in San Quentin Prison. Um, I was then the director of the Arts and Corrections program for the California Department of Corrections, which was a department of the Department of Corrections. It was not a separate outside entity. This production was created in collaboration with Samuel Beckett, who is the playwright.
Oh, wow.
It was a one-of-a-kind event. The people in this play, and this play was produced 20 years ago, are all still inside because at the time San Quentin was a level 4, which meant that all those people were lifers. I spent 10 years working in the Department of Corrections, and as a business, one of the aspects of my business is helping and advising others who are working in particularly public institutions like prisons, mental hospitals, senior centers, etc., navigate and deal with the often difficult journey of integrating the arts with constrained, controlled, mandated, highly structured environments like prisons or mental hospitals.
It's interesting that you mentioned just senior centers, though, as well. I have a client and a partner that I work with who recently has gone into it's an apartment, but it's within a senior living community, and is very interested in the mental health aspects of people living there. And it strikes me that arts programming would be a fabulous addition there. Just curious, in terms of working with Samuel Beckett, did you just reach out to him and say, like, I'm Bill, I'm doing this project, do you want to be involved? How did you make that happen?
Interestingly enough, this came to us by way of a theater director named Jan Jansson in Sweden, who had worked with Beckett, and he dropped out of the sky, in a sense, and said, "Oh, San Quentin, I'd like to do Godot at San Quentin. Would you be interested?" We said, "Sure."
Wow.
So
Cool.
he had the connection to Beckett, and this was very close to the time that Beckett passed away. So this was one of the last projects that Beckett
Wow.
was involved in
And,
from afar.
and you found the response. So all the actors, everyone they were prisoners. They were all incarcerated there. How did you find the response from the people there in terms of acting and doing the play?
There were 10 performances, 5 for incarcerated men at the time, and 5 for the public.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, Barney Rossett, who was then the editor of Grove Press, who was Beckett's publisher, basically said he felt this was the purest, most powerful performance he had ever seen of Waiting for Godot, mainly because outside audiences see the script as abstract and experimental, and he
Interesting.
understood that Waiting for Godot was very much like a real life story that
Sure.
people in prison live every day, and that it translated what Beckett had in mind in a way that nobody
Wow.
from the outside could ever have. Yes.
Wow. Your podcast, Change the Story, Change the World.
Yes. So most of my work, or a lot of my work, is based on basically researching and documenting the extraordinary stories of artists from around the world who are using the arts as a catalyst for building caring, capable communities. And it's sort of a natural thing from writing books to creating and transmitting those stories through podcasts. So Change the Story, Change the World is a podcast that appears every 2 weeks. We're now have an archive of 56 episodes. Actually, one of the stories I just mentioned to you, which is Pillsbury House and Theater, that's the most recent one that's up right now. And each one of these stories is basically an artist or group of artists talking about the history of their work in everything from prisons to dealing with veterans issues post
But also, I mean,
Vietnam.
I've seen in other countries where people are actually making change. They're making statements about the government and actually making political change.
Absolutely. And many of the stories that are in that book are actually also
Mhm.
in Change the Story, Change the World, like Da Theater, who
That's
is
what I was thinking
a
of.
theater
Mhm.
company in Belgrade, Yugoslavia, who were in the streets fighting Slobodan Milosevic, and a part of the movement that toppled him, have, continued their work in a very difficult environment, because Serbia has continued to be one of those places in Eastern Europe where the tilt back and forth between democracy and repressive government is always a question. And so,
Well, and they did a public performance in the square, and we're literally wondering, like, if the soldiers around the edge were going to arrest them or what was going to happen. I mean,
yeah,
it was
yeah,
at a lot of risk.
their first performance in public took place in a square, where they were basically chanting songs from Bertolt Brecht,
Mm,
uh, and basically saying this was during the time of the wars in the former Yugoslavia. And they were basically saying to the people in the square, our leader is lying about the fact that there is no war. There is a war. We're having a war. It's in your face. And lo and behold, as they performed in the streets, the square filled up with soldiers with um, with guns. And actually, that part of the book is in the podcast on Da.
mhm.
This is
And and I apologize. I knew
no,
this would
yeah,
happen. We're
yeah,
already at time. So
okay,
so tell tell me your edited version of the
very
story of
quickly.
this one.
Charian and Peace, two performers from Phnom Penh in Cambodia,
Mhm,
who are part of an organization called RAM, who in the post Khmer Rouge time, Khmer Rouge murdered over 2 million people in a 4-year period. 95% of all the living artists in Cambodia were murdered during that time. And RAM is an organization attempting to basically resurrect the cultural life of Cambodia in the wake of that event.
mm. Our guest about I think he was on 2 weeks ago, his actually mom escaped from there, with him and his I think there were 5 or 6 kids, and they escaped to France, actually, like,
Yes.
right around 79 to get out, and
Mhm.
so yeah, so he was one of the people who was fortunate enough to get away and to get out,
Yep.
because of the strength of his mom is what he attributes that to.
And this is pretty simple. These are the covers of 5 books, Art in Upheaval, which you held up
Mhm,
previously. The next one is called Story Story, which is basically a prose poem with illustrations trying to um, imagine the birth of the first story in the world,
hmm,
and the why and wherefare of stories in human history and human behavior. Between Grace and Fear, the bottom one on the left, is a series of interviews with leaders in the arts-based community development movement, basically asking the question, what is the role of the arts in a time of change?
mhm,
Uh, the center one in the bottom is Art and Other Places, which is my first book, which is Billy about artists working in social institutions and community institutions. And Making Exact Change was a research project that asked the question, um, how have artists made significant and sustained impact on communities? And there's a lot
oh.
of data and a lot of case studies filled up in that book.
Interesting. Okay, so this one I added. This is the Dos Equis, most interesting man in the world. I
Yes.
was gonna say that you could give him a run for your money.
Thank you, thank you, I appreciate it. No, I love the
So
beer, so, no problem.
perfect. So actually we're at that time. Thank you so much. I knew that sharing the stories would show the impact. And again, I know you've worked within business corporations that realize their communities can be changed, but really, I think that helped just hit home how powerful the arts can be. So now let me ask you a question. Are you going to do the exercise with me? So I need to know if you can guess why I picked this exercise for you. So it's at your desk. You have to keep your core braced. You do a push up, and then it's a side plank. So you open to the side and then you do it. Are you going to do it with me? Excellent. And for anyone else watching at home, live or afterwards, I hope you will as well. So a push up to a side plank. There you go.
There we go.
So now can you guess why I picked this one for you?
I don't know, pushing and pulling, giving and taking. I don't know.
That's good. I always like people's ideas of pushing and pulling, giving and taking. I feel like it was really multi-layered because I look at the strength. So, for push-ups and for planks, you really have to have a strong core. And I think that's what happens when you're doing community arts. Like you have to have this strong core belief that something will work, because I'm sure there's times where as you're implementing it, like you don't know it's going to work until you see it come out at the end. So that's true with these kinds of exercises. And then I also liked the drama of the reveal. So the drama of the reveal, I actually wore the love shirt on positive. So it was the drama of revealing the love, which is what you'll find, when people come together as a community. So that, my friend, is how we ended up with that exercise.
Wonderful.
For
I appreciate it.
So, well, thank you so much for being here. So this is Bill Cleveland, founder of the Center for the Study of Arts and Community. You can find out more at artandcommunity.com. And of course, we hope that you'll check it out. I know I found it on Spotify. I'm sure it's everywhere you watch, listen to podcasts. Change the story, change the world. Bill, thank you so much for joining us. So actually, in one comment, Cecilia, thank you for watching. Side plank shows the willingness to open up and reach out. Yeah. Excellent. Yes. So thank you so much for watching. I like your guest. Bill, appreciate you so much and the work you're doing to make positive change in the world. So thank you. Okay.
It's a privilege.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
All right.